evening. This is Tommy Patterman. Joining me tonight is Eric Sullivan.
Good sir.
This is consent of the governor.
You better consent. You better consent.
I think I'm taking a shit. Look like I'm a frog dude taking a shit.
Like a frog dude.
Frog dude.
Fucking
No,
people.
frog dude.
Well,
finally, actually, tonight we're going to talk about Antarctica. And we might
for
get
real
cut short. But
we'll probably get cut short. This is going to be amazing.
I find it really interesting that just even some of the talking points that I want to bring up too, it kind of just ties into everything that is involved with this whole freedom movement and hiding a secret. And just by keeping the people dumb enough to not understand how things really work, how there's, like we were talking about, like God's law and all that business and how they take that away from you. But I think this really kind of ties into all that. And that's Antarctica. Let's start there.
He just sent me a text.
What?
To email him the link to this, and he can jump in. He doesn't have a whole lot of time. No shit. Dude.
Oh, you can't make
this
shit up.
You can't make this
shit up.
Dude, we got to do it. We'll do it after this. How about that?
Yeah. I'll send him the link here.
Yeah, and we'll save this as the intro because this is email. Hey, everybody. This is Eric Sullivan and
Tommy Patterman.
And we're actually doing an intro that's semi-professional today because we got Robert Michael on. And this is a cat I am in a couple of groups with, and he's actually helping me out with not only personal trust and personal standing stuff, but also with a project of mine that I've been working on for a while. And I did mention it in a past episode. But Robert Michael is from REM. Was that?
Private management?
Private management. That's right. I was going to have to go back and look at that. Anyway, Robert is by far one of the more well, I would say, spoken and knowledgeable cats in this area of not just like law, but mostly equity. This thing about making sure that, he's got 3 pillars of it, and I'll let him explain it. Robert Michael, go ahead. Introduce yourself.
So, I've been studying law and applying it for 12 years. I started in about 2009 to wake up and understand that everything we're being taught is basically a lie, and that law fascinated me. So after, having a lifetime of carpentry from the age of 13, my father taught me carpentry, and being a musician, all of a sudden my entire life changed, and I found myself interested in something I never would have imagined. Not only that I would have imagined being interested in it, but that I was actually good at it, and I kept going further down the rabbit hole to discover that I am way more powerful in law than 90% of the attorneys out there that could represent me, because I learned that if they represent me, I'm not present, and I've given up all my rights simply by studying the definition of a torn, which means to agree to the new landlord's contract. So if a torn means for me to give my rights up over to the new landlord, then an attorney, just like an employee, is one who does something for me which is to give my rights over. And they don't know that. It's not their fault. However, I started to explore that world. And once I got deep into it, I was like, oh man, this is way deeper than any of us could have imagined. And I started implementing, going into courtrooms as counsel for people. I've had judges threaten me with arrest. I've had 10 marshals try to arrest me and they couldn't, so I definitely have put my time in to debunk a lot of what people will try to throw at me as, that's not true. That's not true. Well, it certainly is true because I lived it. So, that's that you'll hear me come from that position for the most part.
Yeah. So. And so I wanted to ask a quick question. And then as Tom is somebody that's not the most familiar with trust and everything, I kind of wanted to have him listen and see if he's got a couple questions and kind of get this mindset of somebody who has no, or at least a different idea of what trust is. So
Mhm.
this question might lead into that. And a lot of people's understanding of trust is not just the idea of like maybe trust fund kids or a trust regarding, most commonly utilized is this idea of an estate as far as somebody who's passed away or things like that. And I've heard you explain it very well in that facet, like that's one of the things that trust is good for. But what the law is actually written as is something completely different due to the way the bar association society has convinced us to incorporate ourselves and voluntarily get into this level of servitude, if not slavery. So, one of the things I wanted to ask is, are these trusts not just something to protect your personal assets and everything else, but your one true asset, which is your freedom?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
100%.
Okay.
Yes.
And by doing so, I know you have these three pillars, right? One of which is standing. Go ahead and explain the other two, because I do believe a lot of people in this freedom movement stand on this, stool that's only got one leg, and that's what they're trying to do is kind of, fix their standing, and they think that's all they have to do. So if you could not just explain, a little bit about standing. I think a lot of people understand that or overstand that, but get into the other two in a little bit more depth if you wouldn't mind.
Absolutely. So, speaking on trust and estate, I always go to definitions. Definitions, definite. If you're not looking at a legal dictionary, then you're not understanding what's being spoken to you, because every language has a dictionary because you don't understand the language. Same thing, no different with legal language, no different with medical language, no different with banking language. They all have dictionaries. So if you're not reading that and understanding that, you're way off the mark to begin with. You're just going to rack your brain. So I always went to definitions, and I went to the definition. Even recently, I constantly, in my 12 years, I'm still going back to the law dictionary. And I went to Black's Law 7th to look up law of status, right? Because everybody's correcting status in the freedom community, so to speak. And I was blown away because I learned something I didn't learn. This was about 2 years ago. And I was like, oh my gosh, it says one of the three departments of civil law. Law of status is one, law of obligation, which means contracts, is another, and the law of property, which is another, which is everything you could possibly own. And there's two categories of property: personal and real. Real is anything, the earth and anything attached to it, as far as trees, minerals, water. I think that's real property. So anyhow, most people are focused on their status, but there is an element of your status that is, of course, these other two pillars. So the civil law, everybody, oh, we're a common law country. Well, we used to be, but now we're civil law, and everything falls under this umbrella of civil law. So if you're not taking care of those three legs in any particular situation, you're missing one leg of the table, and it's going to fall over. Okay, because it's a three-legged table. So that's where I come in to try to help people, with so the trust, okay, that falls under your property and obligation. So if you create a trust, for those of you that don't know what a trust is, and very much like Eric said, when I was coming up and I was a contractor, I used to meet these people and these trust fund babies. And I was like, what in the hell is this trust, man? It's like Bigfoot. Like, I hear about it, but I never see it. What is it? Now I know it inside now. But basically speaking, a trust is something very simple. It has to have parties and property. The parties are, if I give something to Eric as a piece of property to hold for Tommy, we just created a trust. Eric has the duty to make sure that the legal part of that property is taken care of because he's a trustee. Tommy benefits from that property. So if it's a house, Eric has to make sure that all the insurances are kept up, all this stuff is kept up, and Tommy just gets to live in it. Doesn't have to worry about any of it because he's the beneficiary. Eric can't live in it because he's the trustee. He's the one with the duty, the most highest honorable duty to protect that property. So what happens, and I'm the grantor because I granted that property. So those are the three parties. What happens in a trust situation in terms of the property now gets into the obligations, right? Eric has an obligation. I had an obligation. Well, I didn't really have an obligation. I created one by giving the property to Eric. Eric now has an obligation and a duty to administer this property for on Tommy's behalf. So what I did was I took the title to that property. Now, I know a lot of people watching probably don't even really know what title is. So let's break it down real simple. You buy a TV, you get a receipt. You have title in your hand. That's what a title is. Now, it can come in 45 pages of a title for your house, or it can come in one little slip from Walmart. It does not negate the fact that it's a title, okay, legally speaking.
It's a bill of sale from one person to another with it just listing the transaction.
Yes.
Yeah, the transaction.
Transaction ownership, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the acknowledgement that you purchased something for value from someone else is what the title is.
Yep.
So back in the feudal times, when they started using these trusts, they called them trust indentures, which meant they took it and they cut it like this, indentured. And then the other holder of that hat, if the two pieces didn't match up, then that wasn't the true trust indenture beneficiary. Only the beneficiary held the piece. So they call it an indenture. And an indenture is nothing more than the contract between all the parties that creates that trust. That's really it. So they're not super complicated, but they're super protective. And here's why. Because Eric doesn't have any personal liability over that property. In other words, he owns the house for Tommy. Tommy has a party. Somebody comes over and breaks their arms. They fall down the steps. I'm going to sue Tommy for his house. Well, he can't sue Tommy. He has to sue Eric. Okay. Now, he can sue Eric. Sure. He can sue the trust, but he can't sue Tommy and he can't sue Eric personally. Eric can't be sued. Like, in other words, let's say the house, the judge says, okay, well, you got to give them the house plus $500,000. Well, if the trust doesn't have $5,000, they ain't getting it because Eric, they can't take it out of Eric. They can't take it out of Tommy, and the trust doesn't have it, which is why you want to put every piece of property that has liability, a potential liability, into a separate trust. And I'll give you an example of that. When John F. Kennedy's cat mauled some guy's face, and the guy said, and this is a very popular story, and the guy said, well, I'm going to sue the Kennedys because they got all kinds of money, and this cat just scratched my face and screwed me all up. So they went to court. Guess what? Cat was in a trust. Guess what the guy got awarded? The cat, because that's all that was in the trust. So he had a nice new buddy that mauled his face, and that's all he could get. Okay.
So that brings me to the one other caveat of this question that I was going to do, and then hand it over to Tom to ask a couple.
Sure.
This is how the rich stay rich, is it not?
Yes, 100%, man. They had some of these rich have 100 or more trusts. Every piece of property is in a trust. Some of your largest corporations that you think are corporations are actually trusts. They're not corporations. So
and this keeps their liability down over and above because of one, in my understanding, one true fact regarding trust is a trust is private. It's a private contract, and the public cannot pierce the veil of a private contract. Is that, or is that not correct?
That is correct, as long as you're not registering that trust with the state, because the minute you register anything with the state, you've given them title. That's why when you get your car, you don't have title to that, not even when you pay it off. You have a certificate of title. What is a certificate? A certificate is a certification that something exists, but it's not it. It's not the real one. It's the certification. So a non-registered trust, and written the right way, of course, yes, is completely protective, and the state cannot impair or impede the obligation of contract, so they can't get in the middle of it. As long as you're not breaking the law.
Well, which also means that you have to maintain this lawful status, not legal status, which means that you're not acting. So one would say that acting as a doctor without a license is illegal, but it's not unlawful given a private trust. So therefore, I could operate without a license and be A-okay because it's a private membership, let's say.
That's right. So do we know the definition of license? And if not, let me give it to you.
Definitions.
Right. The definition of a license legally, look this up, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't know it verbatim, but the essence of it is It's getting authority from someone of authority to do something that is otherwise illegal. So driving your car, is that illegal? No. Putting a roof on somebody's house, is that illegal? No. It's only illegal because you got the license. Otherwise, it's not illegal. You're not hurting anybody. There's no damage, there's no crime, there's no nothing. So you just gave somebody the right to commit crime by giving them a license. Because now that I have a license, I can go out and commit crime and you can hold me responsible for it. But there was no crime prior to the license. That's
right.
How ridiculous the world is that we're living in.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
So,
well, I want to get into a definition quite a bit because I've been hearing a lot about it lately about, like employees, for example, to employ, what, could you just elaborate on some real common verbiage that people misunderstand on a regular basis and how
Yep.
it can benefit them?
Absolutely. So let me ask you, Tommy, what is a person?
Man, I was talking to Sully about this a while ago.
But just give me your basic definition of what you've always believed a person is.
Oh, a person is, it's a person is that guy over there. It's just, somebody who lives in the same reality and materium than I do.
Right.
But and you are absolutely right. He is absolutely right because they haven't become a people.
Yeah, true. Okay.
Right?
But when you look that definition up, more so in the statutory definition, what I mean by that is if you go into your state codes and your federal code, most chapters and subchapters have a definition section to define what the term means in those laws. So you'll find it mostly in there, and you will find it in law dictionaries too. But a person is a corporation, an LLC, a partnership, a trust. It has nothing to do with a living man. And that is because the word persona, where it comes from, means one who wears a mask. So a corporation can wear a mask as a person. They've made that legal. Let's get into another definition, legal fiction. Legal fiction is I can create anything out of fiction as long as I can use it to meet the ends of justice. Well, that's kind of not fair because the ones who are administering the justice can create something out of fiction and it's legal, but it's fiction. So just look up the definition of legal fiction. That's a huge one.
Yeah.
So a common one is person, estate. You had mentioned estate earlier. If you look at the legal definition of estate, it's like 20 pages long, right? And I always say when you encounter a definition that's extremely long, it's because the concept of it is really simple. And if you knew the actual essence of that word, you would be 10 times more powerful. So how do we hide something that's simple? We camouflage it with complexity. The term estate, in essence, means the sum of all property owned by a person. Right? You can have a corporate estate. You can have a trust estate. You can have your personal estate. It's the sum of all property. People think it's a house and the chairs and stuff like that. Okay, it is. But it's the sum of all of that. That is the estate. Okay.
Including the children.
Including the children, which are products of the union under the contract of the marriage agreement. They're considered products. Okay.
Marriage,
goods.
Yeah.
The rabbit hole gets.
What's that? License. The marriage license. Yeah. You and I have been discussing this quite a bit, where an actual marriage license is handing over anything that the union produces after the fact is now in the hands of whatever state you filed that license in, which has to also bow down to the federal Article 1, supremacy clause.
Yes, exactly. So
it's owned by yourself and your wife over to the state, including any future children.
Any future products of the union of the two persons, which are corporate organizations, they're not real. So again, is it against the law to marry somebody? Is it illegal? No.
Then why get a license?
And then they go, oh, well, and then you go to the church and they're like, we can't marry you without a license. Wait a minute. Isn't there a separation of church and state? Then why are you requiring me to give you a license? And I'll tell you why. It's called 501c3. Because they registered as a 501c3, they are under obligation of the state's dictates. when really they could be outside of that law according to 508c1a in that very same code, which says churches and their auxiliaries and associations are accepted from the code. EXCEPTED, accepted, meaning the code applies to every other nonprofit except a church. But nobody tells them this. The attorneys don't know this. The accountants don't know this. And of course, what's their job? To fear you into, oh no, that doesn't sound right because for 20 years I've been doing it this way. Well, that doesn't matter. My grandmother's been driving. She's 80 some years old and she still sucks at it, but she's got a license to drive, doesn't she? Right. So come on,
this was a part of a discussion that Sully and I were having too, because we were going to be talking about crazy shit in Antarctica and whatnot. But I mean, imagine if the majority of people actually knew this. Like, I mean, this is like a secret that if this gets out for them, their entire reality completely falls apart.
The charade.
Yes.
And I mean, this has been happening for hundreds, if not, well, at least in this society for thousands of years, as we know it, in this whatever advanced society, or, how many times we've done this before in the past. And, yeah, this is the biggest lie. This is the biggest secret that they have to keep from people.
Absolutely.
And with their charades as of late and how sloppy they've gotten, because I think I'm under the impression that whatever the powers that be are out there, who's ever withholding this information, they think we're fucking retards. And
of course,
and rightfully so, because you got to look at a lot of them. You got to look at a lot
of
people.
They are retards.
And how convinced they are by just legal fiction,
Yeah.
And it drives me nuts that, that these people, spewing this shit aren't held responsible for basically keeping the people debt slaves.
You make a valid point right there, and it leads us into another quick rabbit hole. This idea of not being held responsible. So many people, Tommy and I talk about it constantly, the people in power, we all wonder, like, how are they not in jail? I would be in jail for printing that money because that's counterfeit. I would be in jail for doing this. I would be in jail for doing that. It doesn't matter. Everybody's like, jail, jail, jail. How come they're not in jail? Why is there this two-tiered justice system? I think that this idea of trust law is the reason why we have a two-tiered justice system, and this legal fiction, the combination of the two. And it's the reason why they're not going to jail. And I've seen it proven in the writings between John Adams and his son, John Quincy Adams, and how he maintained his standing in a state. Can you elaborate on this two-tiered justice system? And I don't care if you know anything about John Quincy Adams or anything, but that's an interesting story if you haven't gotten into it, and how he owned the majority or a good portion of Virginia at 16. So
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, people think that we came over here and we fought this war, we were free, which is nothing more than another fiction lie, because we didn't fight any war with a bunch of muskets and pitchforks and beat the corporate state, which had a flag, which is nothing more than a branding, like IBM would brand Apple and all. That's all the flag is. It's corporate branding. They came over here. They said, we're tired of your shit, right? So let's even back up to that. How did they even claim title, receipt to the land if the natives here did not believe in ownership? If the natives didn't believe in ownership, how did the deed, the way that they do it in the system, pass legally to the Europeans? It didn't. They came over under conquest. Yes. Inquisition, conquest, and it's called the doctrine of discovery, the right of inquisition, the right of discovery, or doctrine of discovery, and the right of conquest. Okay, so they came over here. Get out of our way. We're taking this land. You guys don't believe in Jesus. You're done. Kill them, right? Because we have the right under the inquest to do that. So they come over. They do that. Then a bunch of people come over and they go, we want to be free. We're tired of the king in England. So they go, okay, yeah, great. Let's fight them. Okay, great. We've got pitchforks and muskets. Okay, bring the largest army in the world over here because we're going to beat them. Like, okay, David and Goliath. Great. I get it. It's possible, right? But if you look at history, they had to hire the French to come over and fight that war for them. And if you read the Paris Peace Treaty, which was 1783, I believe, which wasn't long after 1776, right? It's only 7 years later. Paris Peace Treaty shows clearly that the King of England who was the Prince Elector, which means the Electoral College of the Pope, all right, had also control over the French army. So basically, England allowed us to buy their controlled army under the French and fight themselves just to make it look like we had some freedom. Okay, that's all they did.
So every war is a banker's war.
Every war is a banker's war. The Declaration of Independence is the most, to me, the most proficient document to freedom, and is the only one. Okay, and the Articles of Confederation was a good try, but they quickly got rid of that with first they brought in the Northwest Ordinance, and then they brought in the Constitution, which was nothing more than a con to con people back into the cage that were free under the Declaration of Independence. When people say the Constitution is the best document ever written, I go, bullshit. Why is it then that it's taken 200 and some years to interpret it? Because if it was you mean to tell me these guys were masterminds? They were botanists, astrologers, they knew how to navigate the seas and all this stuff. And you're telling me they couldn't write a document that was easily figured out in the future? No.
Yeah.
They put a bunch of loopholes in there so that eventually they could make these people who thought they were free become slaves again, because just like I think it was Von Goethe said, the best slave is the one that thinks he's free. And that's the whole catch. So when you get into the court system, if you look, actually, maybe I still have it pulled up. Let me see if I got this pulled up, because your jaw will drop when you see, I don't think I do. So it was Justice Marshall. It was one of the first Supreme Court cases, and there was an issue of the land, right? And Justice Marshall said, you don't know, no one here owns the land. That's ridiculous. And you won't own the land because it doesn't belong to you. The king granted that land. So sorry about your luck. I know you think that you're going to get your land, but you're never going to get it because you don't own it. And that's where we get into the feudal system that sets up the two-tier court system, that sets up the, what you think is going in and getting justice, which is nothing more than contract, commercial, seizing the vessel, maritime law, these things that you may have heard about on the internet.
That's one thing I'm hearing about too, is how a lot of chatter about how the laws of the water are starting to encroach on, maritime law starting to encroach
the flooding
on the laws of the land. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's starting to kind of flood into the land right now. And I don't know a ton about that, but could you elaborate on that?
Sure, yeah. Well, first off, it's not that it's flooding into the land right now. We've been underwater for years.
Legitimately, fiscally, and
yes.
Yeah.
The law of the land, okay, is quote unquote the Constitution. That's what they wrote as the law of the land, so to speak. So when people were free and they wrote this Constitution, we'll back up to that for a minute just to give some background. Okay, there were men that didn't trust the Constitution. Your guys like Patrick Henry and all, right, and all the anti-federalists. They didn't trust the Constitution because they said something is not right. We don't feel right. And Patrick Henry said, how are you going to create a contract and call me as the people? I didn't agree to that. I'm not the people. Bullshit. That's why Patrick Henry wouldn't become president even when they asked him. He's like, I don't want to be. I know how this works, right? So they put this thing called the Bill of Rights. And that Bill of Rights was a Hail Mary at the last minute to say, we're not going to ratify this unless you put protections in for the people, for the real people who didn't sign this thing, okay? So in order for them to get around that law of the land with its amendments, they had to use law that pertained to commerce. At the time, commercial law was about shipping and on the sea. And when you're on the sea, the captain of that ship, the president of the corporation, is the dictator. He will, she will, whomever will say what gets done, when, and how. And if you don't like it, we will throw you overboard because you're putting all our lives in danger. So in order for them to get around this Constitution and stuff, they brought the sea onto the land, and then they started creating vessels out of everybody, right? which is your, what they call, like you've heard people say, that's my, when they refer to your name, that's my government. That's my government. That's true. The government created a vessel and created an organization and gave it your name so that you believed you were it every time you go into court to into their ship, into their citizenship, to, you know, steer this vessel that is not you. And because you're agreeing to steer this vessel, you get fined, charged, and imprisoned because that's our vessel and you're steering it. You've commandeered it. We didn't give you the authority to do that. That's how the maritime law works.
You've submitted through acquiescence, and that's the majority of the stuff where I was telling you about, you know, John Quincy Adams, where he said he taught his son how to do the things that were necessary for them to do in order to maintain their family, let's say, livelihood, or their family
Lineage.
estate, their lineage, and to protect their standing and their property and their obligation. And they knew those things, and that's what was taught. And you actually say a lot about, you know, back in the day, everybody actually knew, I mean, the random family knew 10 times more about law than the average attorney we have today. And I mean, I definitely want to keep going. I know you have some time. We got to take a short intermission here real quick. But there's something that I got into a while ago, and it was involving this freedom movement. And you discussed Patrick Henry and how he wanted to deny the presidency, or he was like, hey, how are you going to claim me as the people? The first time I ever heard that was a guy named David Williams, who is the prime minister of, you're familiar with him then?
Oh, yeah, out of Florida.
Okay.
Yeah, he was out of Florida. He's got his own island, all that stuff.
Yeah, so it's not his island. He did kind of inherit it from people that were doing. So it's the Dominion of Melchizedek. And this was something that I really got into a lot, just because of a very short book that was written before the Constitution, that, in my opinion, was a compact between rulers, right? And it was Vattel's Law of Nations. Are you familiar with it?
Oh, yeah, intimately, yeah.
Okay, good. So I'd really like to get into that on the next one, but he does a really good job of discussing this capitonym of we the people. The reason why people is actually capitalized, and then towards the end of the preamble of the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, it says, and there, now you see it again, capital P, posterity. Right. So that it was, well, and it's building the definition of who actually had rights to that Constitution. And I think we should get into that in a minute here on this next little part, because that was a lot to unpack. I mean, everything, we're trying to keep it super simple. And Tom, I mean, absolutely chime in on this. On the next one, if you don't get something, just immediately stop and say, yo, wait, let's pull it. Let's pull a definition out of there. You know,
it's jump in and go, but Rob, say something. You know, because I can unload a shit ton of information that'll make your head spin.
It's just funny how when you're involved in like a lot of these chat groups and a lot of these different, you're always constantly like, you know, subconsciously seeing a lot of this information. It's funny how much of it I've taken in and how much I've seen already. That all makes sense, you know?
Well, and one of the biggest philosophies to ever, like I tell people constantly, if your government has made a law and they name that law, whatever the case may be, just whatever the name is, consider it the opposite. So the Patriot Act was one of the most unpatriotic things to ever happen, right? Obviously, Affordable Care Act is extremely unaffordable, right? So the same idea applies with all law, not just from the politicians, every single law.
Well, but this is something that I was saying before, though. They've gotten so blatant. They don't even care anymore. They don't even care about hiding anything, and they're just like shoving this in your face and kind of laughing about it. You know, like, here, eat the shit. All right. You're like, I totally ate the shit. Look at, he likes it too.
Because you're no longer the king, you're the peasant. So they can tell you whatever they want, and you got it, and bend over and take it.
Right.
Yeah, and that's, gosh, you know, that was, you know, you go back to like the Revolutionary War, and you know, and I really didn't think about it until up in the last few years, but it's like, yeah, you really think that, you know, this largest dynasty is just going to be like, all right, guys, you kicked our ass. We're going to leave. You can
Right.
keep all the resources. You can have all the fun you want. We're just going to leave you alone. That makes a lot of sense because that's the nature of people, right? Fuck no.
Yeah.
I mean, so you look at this, I mean, looking at different historical sites and how many people, how many different um uh nationals actually, occupied the points. Like, for example, like the military bases down in Alabama, right at the down at the Gulf Shores area, Fort Morgan. And I mean, over the years, like that is our nature to constantly, to conquer, to seek and destroy, to get. I mean, that's what these narcissists fucking do. They've been doing it forever.
And then most of it is Vatican driven.
Yeah.
Right? Most of it is, all you got to do is read the papal bulls over the years of what they've decreed and what they were able to do.
Mhm.
And they only do that simply because they state that they're the ones that can do it. That's the only claim they have.
And I love
They
it.
don't
Once
have
again,
anything.
right in your face. Separation of church and state. Oh, or in God we trust on the dollar bill. It's like, oh, fuck you. Once again, just being blatantly obvious about, basically we're going to do whatever the hell we want. We've created our own laws. You are too stupid to understand, what's really going on here and what you're entitled to as being born a person in this reality.
And the other part of it is that they're not obliged to tell us. Like there's something within these within these laws that actually states that
it's like being in a courtroom, and if the lawyer asks, "Do you know what time it is?" You say yes.
You don't say 5:45.
Oh yeah, it's 11:35. No, you don't have to, go into detail on these things. I guess when asked outright, you can be as ambiguous as possible because of legal fiction.
Answer the question with a question every single time.
Legal fiction was created so that they can administer justice however they want. Mm-hmm. Just read the definition of legal fiction. You'll be blown away.
Yeah. And on that note, we're going to take a quick intermission and then be right back.
Yep. I'll send the link to you, Sully, there. All right.
Cool.
All right.
Back in action.
Yes, sir.
Hell yeah.
So, we're recording. So, as I'm pouring a beer, see, we're so professional.
What kind of beer is that?
Most beers aren't pink.
Are you drinking one of those?
It's a sour.
It's a sour, dude. Really?
Come on, man.
Yeah. I like my beer to taste like shit.
I do.
I'm
a wine. I mean,
I'm a wino, and you beer people are all like, "What's the flavor of the week?"
Well, so I was talking with Robert last night. I'm trying to get him into crypto so he can be able to accept other payments, because one of the things I wanted to do was send him a little gift. And to be honest with you, that's one of the things that one of my projects works on a lot is crypto and the ability to donate, because crypto people are by far the best folks when it comes to donating things and really spreading the wealth and understanding freedom and everything else. They just don't understand it at this level. So I'd love to get Robert in and I actually have meetings on Saturday with some folks to help crypto people get into this level of freedom, because they're always worried about, what am I going to do about the SEC? Well, create a private membership association, and then you don't have to worry about the SEC. You're going to do
hands off.
Well, it's the same way with the whole bypassing a liquor license. If you want to, have a place on Main Street, that sells booze or not sells booze, it's a private membership where you have to pay to get in. This is, that's all it is. This is our club, and you fuckers can't be a part of it.
That's it. Freedom of association. That's right.
Freedom. And this is the one thing I wanted to bring up too, though, is I talked to Sully about this a lot, and about, getting outside of the system, and how the heck do you, still get, any sort of benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, bank accounts, banking. I mean, obviously with cryptocurrencies, that definitely, changes the idea of the banking system, as that starts to be exposed as we go down the road here. But yeah, I mean, how do you get outside of the system, and can you reap any of the benefits that live inside of the system?
This is going to be so easy. It's going to blow your mind.
Mhm.
You're not in the system. And you don't get any of those benefits. Your straw man does.
Mm,
Your government entity that they created does. That's who gets all the stuff. The problem is you keep stepping up to go, yeah, hit me with all the legal fines because you're taking the wrong half of the title. Right? So if you're the beneficial owner of this thing that all this that has all these benefits, and then you have all the rights to it without the legal responsibility.
mm,
Okay, that's the key to getting quote unquote outside the system. You're not really in the system. The information for your fictional entity that they created at birth with your name is in the system.
mhm,
You are just being the one, you're just acting as the one accountable for all of its debts.
mhm,
So
So it's a
let's
matter of,
let's
yeah,
say this real quick to just bring everything back full circle. When we explained trust, and you said I was the trustee taking care of Tommy's house at your direction, what you're saying is that all of those things that we've been taking care of as trustees, we're actually the beneficiary if we know how to claim that spot, and we can do exactly the way, things were originally intended, and say, yo, trustee, pay my bills. Is that
yes.
is that a thing?
Yeah, it should be a thing. Obviously, putting it into practice is not easy, nor is it really ever heard of, because you're now we're so far in to being indoctrinated into all this that especially the people in the offices, they don't know this shit. They're more indoctrinated than we are.
mhm,
So it's not so much about getting out of the system as it is about separating yourself from what is in the system and how do you do that legally, right? That's and lawfully, because legal and lawful are two different things. So that's where we're at. So that to your question, Tommy, about can we get out of the system or how do we get out of the system,
mhm,
starts with the understanding that I'm not in the system. So first we have to wrap our head around that. Well, what is in the system, right? Well, it's another organization created at birth. And to be honest with you, it's created off of the afterbirth. Okay. The afterbirth is the one that has Tommy's name, not Tommy. The afterbirth is the one that has an all capital letter first, middle, and last, not Tommy. Tommy has a given name and a surname. There's no such thing as a first, middle, and last name unless it's a slave or a piece of property. That's it. So what do they get you to do? First, middle, last, first, middle, last. And what do they always ask you for? Social security number, birth date, because those are the things that identify the government property, not you. And actually, it's against the law for you to give out your social security number. Okay. And it's against the law, but it's not against the law if you volunteer it. All right. And I can show you, I've even got it pulled up on the computer because I was going over it with somebody today. You can,
mhm,
if you screen share, I'll show you where it is. In 31 CFR, which is Code of Federal Regulations, 1.32 says you do not have to give that number out to any component of the Treasury. A component of the Treasury would be the IRS, right?
mhm,
Or any bank or anything like that, or any financial institution. Anyone asking you for that social security number has to give you three things first. Is it voluntary or mandatory? What authority do you have to solicit this number from me? What are you going to use it for? Until they answer those three questions, you don't have to give that number out. And it's against the law for them to deprive you of a privilege, a right, or a service because you didn't give it to them.
mhm,
So these are things that you have to wrap your head around in terms of they're not talking to me. They're talking to this thing that has a social security number, a birth date, which is a creation date, and a name that looks like mine.
Yeah,
Once you can wrap your head around that, you're on your way to separating yourself.
mhm,
and to simplify
That's
that means that it's illegal, or it's not only illegal but also unlawful to have any bank account or any bank not open up a bank account in any name, whether it's in a trust name or a trustee's name or any name whatsoever with a social security number.
Right. And
So does
yeah.
that mean that you have access to liquidity? So if I was going, most people, if I wanted to get a loan to buy a house, most of these establishments that would, write these loans, mortgage lenders, everything else, they require um, a proof of income, right? Some
Mhm.
sort of IRS statement of what I made last year so that they can do their due diligence on how much money I make.
Mhm.
Does this apply to them? And does this idea of liquidity still apply if I don't use my social security number? Can I still be able to get a loan for a house without a social security number?
You should be able to, unless they provide you those three things. However, you're dealing with a bunch of indoctrinated robots who are probably going to deny you and say, well, our policy says. Well, you are a component of the Federal Reserve, which is a component of the Treasury, which you cannot do that. So you would have to push the issue. That's, yeah, it really does become,
Has
it's
has anybody pushed the issue in your knowledge?
not that I know of personally. And I gave up on getting loans and all that stuff because I know the game, so I haven't pushed it either.
Mm.
I
Um,
would,
I
if I wanted to.
So, yeah, so one of the things on my project is I'm trying to push the issue regarding this, and let's say a money changer license, right?
Mhm.
So a money changer license requires me, if I'm going to exchange a dollar bill for Bitcoin or Bitcoin for a good or a service, I need to have a money changer license.
Actually, you don't, because I've got a guy right now in federal court that they're trying to throw him in jail for exchanging money without being licensed for Bitcoin. And he did everything right. He has a private agreement with the people. He has them, sign to specific things in that agreement, and it's his Bitcoin. It's his private property that he is selling them. So they came at him. The judge didn't want to hear a word he said. The attorney, the prosecutor's like, you're nobody. We're just gonna, we're gonna imprison you. So he asked me for help. I stepped in. He did the DOS and POA that I have. He just notified them with a birth certificate filled out for the amount of a few million. We gave it to them, and his next hearing, boy, they didn't say a word. You could hear crickets in that hearing, and the judge allowed him to say anything he wanted. And then the prosecutor offered the judge to give this guy more time after the prosecutor less than a week ago said, I'm not giving you any time. Read the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. Well, once he got that notice, he was like, he needs more time.
Yeah.
So, again, it's about what you know and what these definitions are as to how they're trying to apply this to you. But to get more specific on what you asked and not go down that rabbit trail, yes, you could say, well, I can't give you that. Here is Code of Federal Regulation 31, 1.32. There, answer that.
Right.
Period. Just
Mhm.
answer that, right? Do it or
Right.
don't do it. And under the same set of rules, Code of Federal Regulations, I think it's 26, 1.06, 1.0, or 106.107, it says taxes are voluntary. Okay. So you got to hold them accountable to what their rules are. But, you could use that in that sense. Like you said, you could definitely say, well, I can't give you any of that. So I don't know how we're going to proceed.
Well, and I guess this is something that I'll argue with Sully. It's like, yeah, there's the law, like there's the laws, there's the truth out there, but unfortunately, we all live in reality where it's like we just basically bend over and take it. And I
Mhm.
mean, is the only reason that we're getting, for lack of a better term, fucked here is because more people just don't go no. Like, look at this.
Yes.
No.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
There's
there's a
there's
caveat to no because it's no A, B, and C. No, and then A, I know what the law is as it pertains to you. B, I know what the law is as it pertains to me. That's B. And then C is if you don't do what I'm doing, here are the consequences. And
Right.
and I believe that's in my belief that's where we're failing because we've been indoctrinated into fail. I mean, it's the reason why all your news is fear, fear, fear. You need us. That's the reason why you have attorneys and stuff like that. Um, Real quick, because you mentioned something, and I don't know if a whole lot of people caught it. It sounds to me, and I don't know if I'm using the correct term here, but you're talking to somebody regarding Bitcoin, and there was a case, and now is it ex post facto where you're actually going and creating all of this stuff on the backside and helping him out after the charges?
Hmm.
So is that then applicable? And I don't know if you know this man's name, but I think a lot of people would be very happy if you help let him out. Ross Ulbricht created Silk Road. He was only put in there for some very bunk charges. He wasn't selling drugs. He didn't do anything. He just created a website that linked people selling a product with Bitcoin. Is there a way that you could help that out?
Okay. Unfortunately, not without a shit ton of work, and it's still not all that certain because the
Mhm.
contract and the judgment is already solidified. This guy doesn't have that yet.
Okay.
And this guy stood his ground from the very beginning, said, "You don't have any jurisdiction. Here's a bill of particulars. Answer this." So he did stand his ground before he found me and at least held him off until he got to me. But once that judgment and stuff is already there, that's a perfected interest claim. That's a contract.
Mhm.
And with him being on the inside of jail, you can't really, I mean, I could send him legal docs and stuff if he's representing himself, but he would have to understand what to do on the other end. And that's very hard when you're on the phone because they monitor everything and they'll either cut it out. You
Mm.
can't email him, so that's what he faces.
Right. Yeah. And I've had a lot of conversations with people that's, where I'm telling them like, I can tell you some of this stuff now, but at like you, once I've gotten to a certain point, I end up basically infringing on the government's right of commerce because somebody
Right.
has contracted with them and I can't do that. And then all of a sudden now I'm liable for that. Right.
Yep.
So,
That's a great way to explain it. Yeah.
And it
right.
kind of
So,
seems like too, like like my daddy always said, hey, don't get arrested. Once you're in the system, you're in the system. You know,
yes.
where once
Yeah.
once you are convicted, I mean, and so that just brings me to another question. I hope it's not too much of a can of worms, but so how does their law then, once they have that ruling, once they have that judgment on an individual,
Mhm.
um, is there why is it so difficult to basically go, fuck you, I'm not a part of this system anyways?
Well, it really isn't. But before you continue into this shitstorm that they've created, you have to assert that. That's why, for me, when people come to me for help, I go, the first ththing you need to do is a power of attorney and a declaration of status, property, and obligation right off the bat. And you record that in the county land records, and now it's public record, so the whole world has noticed. That's super powerful as a offensive position before anything happens to you, or
And,
even after
and
something.
not to interrupt, but because we talked about it before, that's declaring your standing and filling out the proper
So you're
paperwork.
saying, yep,
So
take me
okay,
away.
so continue.
And honestly, all that is you just declaring it. It's a
Mhm.
declaration. You're just declaring it and affirming it under a specific affirmation that the law recognizes and having it notarized, and that's it.
Mhm.
Okay. But what you write in there is extremely important because you want to cover all the bases. And that's why I offer my template. So to get back to your question, yeah, it is. It's really hard to overcome that once those contracts and stuff are in place because they're making securities off of the judgments and the court paperwork. They're monetizing that into money. So
Mhm.
now they've got skin in the game, and they're doing it on your straw man fake guy, which is the debtor. Now, if that guy at his sentencing, if they said, remember, you have to authorize your criminal sentence, your civil sentence or judgment, everything. Without your signature and your agreement, they can't apply it. If that guy would have stood up and that judge said, "Do you have any final words before this judgment is completed or whatever?" All he would have had to say is, "I don't understand."
Mm.
You don't understand? What don't you understand? All of it. I just don't understand. That judge, he would have walked right out of there and never went to prison. It would have been over. It's that simple. And we know that because we've had people do that who weren't savvy with this stuff. Like one guy who had a federal criminal charge and he didn't know any of this. He truly didn't understand. And when the judge said, "Do you understand your sentence?" He said, "No, I don't understand." And the judge was like, "Okay, 5 years out the window. There you go. You're free to go."
Wow.
Because you have to authorize everything, because everything is a financial transaction that needs your authorization. Every arrest, every debt, every bill needs your authorization.
And that gets us to the next point, actually, which is contract law, which is part of the
Admiralty
obligations.
or the
Well, it's part of the
maritime.
well, but it's part of the obligations, right?
Right. Yep.
So so on that leg, so let's just make it really simple for people. If I sign a contract and there's only one signature on it, which could be anything from a speeding ticket to a marriage certificate, and I'm not talking with a marriage certificate, there is two, but it's between this law requires it to be between you and the state that's offering this certificate. If you don't have a wet signature and another wet signature from the other party, that's no longer a contract, that's a service agreement. Am I
Right.
wrong?
Yes, it's an
Okay.
agreement. Absolutely. And that's why you'll hear people say, "Oh, these are government contracts." They're not, they're agreements. It's
And
different.
and are there ways to amend that agreement once signed?
There should be, right? Um,
Right.
there
Well,
should be.
so if I signed with my cable company and I don't like their service and I cancel my agreement, there shouldn't be a monopoly on that service, and I should be able to go over from, say Charter or Comcast to, Quest Direct or whatever the case may be, right? So
Yeah.
if I'm getting married in the state of Florida, there's nobody else that'll sign that. So how do we get around this service agreement issue
Well,
of getting these benefits like Tom was asking? Like, how do you get married in a state in a manner that behooves you, right?
very
How do you
simple.
Okay.
Affidavit. When I'm studying, I've got books over there that I found in the used bookstore that are literally original copies from like 1879 and all that, right? I love them because I get into them. Not only do I love that dusty smell that comes off them when I open it, but I'm like, wow, this is how they did it before they imposed all this law. One of the things I found was a marriage is done by affidavit. This is before the state controlled it. Two people say their vows, they have witnesses, and they have a notary. The notary is the state witness. Once that's done, that is a legal and lawful marriage. So if an insurance company tries to not deny you insurance for your wife because you don't have a legal marriage, you go, "Here you go. That's notarized. That's a certificate." So let's get into certificate. The Secretary of State authorizes the notary to get to certify. Certify means certificate. An affidavit notarized is a certificate. If that insurance company tries to deny you a right or privilege, they can now be sued under Title 42, 1985. Some people use 1983, but that's for civil U.S. citizen slaves, not free Americans. So I use 1985. Yes, it's recognized. I got a friend in Montana that, made sure his son and his wife did that, and they get all the benefits just like a married couple. But you have to enforce it with them and say, if you don't do this, I'm coming after you and I will sue you. Meanwhile, I'm going to go over to the next guy and get my insurance. So he's getting my business and you're paying me. So how do you want to do this?
Mhm.
Right. So that's how you would do it.
So you're basically what you're saying is this dog has teeth.
Mm.
Don't be a
Oh,
dick.
yeah. Big time.
Yeah, yeah, and to be honest with you, I've listened to quite a few of your things. And Tom can attest. I've been really researching this a lot. I really like your approach to this, but one of the major things I like is not just obviously your knowledge base, but the main thing that I've seen that I don't think is really you really vocalize a whole lot is this idea of confidence, right? So this
Mhm.
attesting, this asserting, this thing. And I've heard only a couple of your videos where you're like, no, fuck that. I'm the king because
Right.
this paperwork says I'm the king. And if you think you're the king and you're going to convince me that I'm not the king, I'm not getting off of my throne.
Right.
So it's either you acquiesce to where you know you belong, or you try and dethrone me physically. And even so, this is where I stand. So be it. And I don't think enough people are have the spine to do it. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, I'm
True.
having the reason why I'm even asking you questions like this, same reason why I asked you questions in our previous conversations, is because I'm actually going to go to my wife and say, and have had these conversations where it's like, hey, we may have to get a divorce. and and
She was
and
like,
and the first thing that he says is, okay, so do you have kids, and like, is this like a happily married thing? Or are you already divorced? I'm like, no, we are extremely happily married and we're trying to actually have kids now. I just don't want them to be part of the state. And all of a sudden it's a totally different, idea where it's like, I'm trying to dissolve this thing amicably between me and the state. And I'm trying to figure out ways to maybe adopt some of the things that I've learned that might be outside of what Robert does to be able to amend this service agreement. And it is really tough. You have to dissolve the one that was there before and then do another one. And when Robert does say stuff about affidavits, that's a big word, and we were talking about definitions earlier. um, an affidavit is only a declaration of fact, and that's all it is. And so everybody that's like, oh my god, I have to, what's the template for an affidavit?
Mhm.
simple.
An affidavit is like, the best thing you could do is write one sentence and then hit the enter button twice, and then write another sentence, and then hit the
Yep.
enter button twice again, and then write another sentence, and then just make sure that you agree with all of those sentences. And then that's your template, because it's
Yep.
that easy. I mean, anytime somebody finds a fault within multiple sentences, um, in a single paragraph, they can null and void that whole thing. So if everybody understands that one sentence, one space, one sentence, one space,
Keep it
you
simple.
keep it as simple as possible. And as I mean, he stole my ball, I want ball back.
Right.
Like that,
So it's
that's it.
yeah, an affidavit is a statement of fact, and you have to have firsthand knowledge of that fact. That's
Yes.
all it is. And then at the end, you have to put an affirmation to it. I don't swear oaths, so you can get a notary to do a jurat, or you can do an affirmation for those that don't swear oaths because your Christian principles don't allow you to. So that's called a declaration. And they have a specific one that's it's under the laws of the United States without the United States, or under the laws of the United States of America without the United States. It's only,
Corporation.
well, without the United States as its organization that it is,
Right.
but under the laws of the United States of America. So for people that don't believe that they're separate, all you got to do is go to the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, which governs every federal court case in history, well, since 1938, okay, and read section 1746, paragraph 1. Okay, 1746 1 says, without the United States, put this affirmation. Then 2 doesn't say with the United States, but it implies with the United States, put this affirmation, because they're two separate places. So you write your affidavit and you put 1746 1, 28 USC 1746 1, and you're golden. You're under like real law at that point, and they can't trump that with their 1746 2, because that's a bullshit affirmation. It doesn't give them any skin in the game for they're not affirming anything. It's just garbage. But that's
And
what
why
they
are,
all use.
and why are they affirming it? Is because you've maintained the standing of a private citizen, and you told them any public entity can fuck off.
Right.
I
So
just want to bring something up before you mentioned with like Christian values. When do you think the separation between the true ideology of like, Jesus Christ, Christian ideals, the Christian organization, religion, when do you think they were compromised and started beginning
start
to uh,
Started to bastardize it, so to
yeah,
speak.
yeah, where they started to use it, as an opiate for the people, and they started to actually capitalize off of it, use it for control. Like, when
Right
would you
after,
say?
yeah, right after Yeshua ben Joseph died,
Mm,
that's when they changed it, and they gave him the name Jesus, which wasn't his name.
mhm.
That's a combination of two gods, Yahweh and Zeus, right? Jesus, Yahweh. So right after that guy died, which in my opinion didn't happen on a cross,
Mhm,
they changed the story, changed the narrative. Then late years and years later, when they gave it to King James, he rewrote it, fit the narrative even more,
mhm.
and so it's been bastardized from the start.
How many revisions between King James and the initial Bible would you say there are?
That I don't know. I don't know. But it started to make sense to me that this guy, Yeshua ben Joseph, he was doing what we're doing. He's doing the
Mhm,
same thing. He didn't walk on water. That's a metaphor. He didn't heal the sick and make the blind see. That's a metaphor. He
mhm,
made the blind see because he woke them up from
mhm,
their slumber. Oh, now I see. That it wasn't physical like they make it sound, right?
mhm,
So it occurred to me, well, we have this man that totally smoked our system and just ended it for everybody. How do we cover that up going forward? Well, let's create a guy with his name and make everybody believe that they can never be him and he's the only one that can save them.
Well, and this is my wife was in India a few years back, and she talks about all of the uh, documentation on Jesus Christ in India. He
Oh,
spent
yeah.
so much time over there, and I mean, shit that you wouldn't believe half the shit they documented about it.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
Which
so
is
so what you just talked about as far as like this idea of um, a certain entity, the perversion of the entity, the death of the entity, and then the rebirth of the entity is actually what we talk about when we talk about not just the legal fiction and everything else, but also this revolution of empires, right?
Mhm,
So we were discussing this idea of the exchange of England to America through the revolution, right? We
Hmm.
we can actually see that that happened, not just then, but Egypt to Rome to Byzantine to the Gauls to England to America, and every single time it happened in the same way. The
Yep.
people who control things at the top never really lose.
mhm.
Hmm.
They just hand a little bit of control over to someone else. They control the black and white spaces on the chessboard and both sides, the
Yep.
black and white chips. So I don't actually feel that and I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to this no matter, and I don't know why. It's really weird because as somebody that's been involved in this for a while, like yourself, Robert, and Tom, I mean, we screamed about the problems. We didn't know the solutions. We
Yep.
screamed about it on stage and we were wondering what the hell was going on. But you never really understood it back then. And all of a sudden now I've seen this explosion, whether it's on all these YouTube channels or anything else. If you could get 500 people to listen to something like this, even Dean Clifford, or one of my favorites is William Faust, Bill
Hmm.
Faust back in Arizona, about your neighborhood. He's one of my favorites. You actually remind me a lot of him.
Yeah,
Um,
I knew Billy back then,
did
and
you?
he was in a group we were in until he got shot in the face. Unfortunately, poor guy.
Was that Republic Gold USA?
That was no, that was Russo. It was called Restore the America Plan, which was
Oh,
Tim Turner and the
okay.
Republic for the United States of America. Yeah, that was a
Yeah,
big one.
okay. So this is, we're gonna run out of a little bit of time here, but I did want to bring this question up, just because you mentioned it. You said that when you brought basically an offer to the judge and the prosecutor of 3 million for this guy, they were like, okay, he gets some time because they got a little cash put in their face. Um, One of the guys that Bill Faust really did a lot of research with was Winston Shrout. Now,
Hmm.
Winston Shrout got arrested for basically what they called the U.S. Marshals came in, got him part of the Treasury, and they were saying that he was sending in basically false bills. He was doing A for V, so accepted for value. Um, and he must have done something wrong. And I would say, from doing my research on him, I think he was screwing around with the commerce with the slaves. He was going to the plantation and saying, "Yo, fellas, you can all be free if you just come over here." And he didn't understand that there was a step he didn't do.
Right.
And he was basically having them sign checks to the treasury without that other step done. Am I wrong in that? Are you familiar
Nope,
with that?
you're absolutely right. He didn't have the
Okay, cool.
status to do that.
Hmm.
That's what I thought. He didn't have the other leg of the chair.
Yep. He didn't have the
That-
status, nor did he have the priority interest in the property like he was
right.
administrating it to be.
Which is the PMA. If he had them all sign everything and got them all involved into his private membership association, he would
And
have been
yep,
fine, right?
and had the status. And if he wasn't trying to, he was trying to pay off private debts with public instruments, so to speak, too. And you can't mix those two. Like, there was a few things wrong with what he was doing, and I knew there was a reason I always stayed away from it, because even back with Billy Faust and all, I remember, Winston Shroud, and I just was never attracted to it because something doesn't feel right. And then later, once he got arrested, I'm like, yeah, now because I had learned so much, I was able to see what he did wrong.
Just
So,
a quick question, and I hope it's not too big of a question, but you know, how does where is status determined?
again, the law
By
you.
who?
it's
By
determined by you. Yeah.
okay.
And the government already has your straw man in one status, which is
Mhm.
debtor. So you have to determine what your status really is, and you have to assert it. That's the other thing.
Mhm.
You always have to assert your status. Yep.
You're the king, and you decide when you want to be the king.
Yep.
Hell
Yeah, I mean, and
Which
they
which
actually,
means which means you don't go around saying none of these laws apply to me. I'm the king. That's not how a king acts, right?
Yeah.
King has dignity, honor, respect. They respect their contracts. They go, okay, well, this is just business. Oh, you pulled me over on the side of the road. You're going to try to give me a contract. This is just business. It's not your fault, officer. You don't know any of this. I get that. It's just business. So it really is a responsibility.
Oh,
yeah,
totally.
you're not
Totally.
you're not fighting the machine. You're conducting business with the machine.
Yep,
You don't
that's it.
you don't rage against the machine. You
Well,
just
and see
have a little bit of a negotiation with the machine.
this all really, and I know we're running out of time here, but this all
Yeah,
really falls into natural order. This
it
really
is.
does.
It
I mean,
is. This is
this is
natural
all
law.
natural order. This is natural law. This is the way
Natural law.
things are.
All of it.
Yeah.
Which
You
is
know.
what the law of nations. I know we didn't get into that. We could probably get that on another call, but that's
Yeah.
the law of nations is natural law
Mhm.
between kings.
Yep.
Between kings. And
Yep.
and the funny thing is that yeah, there's so much to delve into on Vattel's Law of Nations, and it's a really short book. I mean, it's not that many pages, and to read it in two different mindsets. One as thinking about what a king would be in a certain time, like when it was written, and then you think about it as I'm the king as you're going through it, and then you understand that one word that a lot of people misunderstand, which is sovereignty. And then
Mhm.
you understand how much responsibility there is with sovereignty. And then you understand, like, holy shit, maybe I don't want sovereignty. Maybe I should actually respect this, research it more, not just claim my standing and run around saying, well, I don't have to pay your speeding tickets. No, it's much higher than that. This is about all of
Yeah.
us rising up, like, with the tide, and rising tides raising all ships, and being like, hey, we're all brothers.
Personal responsibility,
Yeah,
man, is
that's
what
what
it
it
Yeah.
is.
it's.
And some
And
people
something
take
that
that over the other. Yeah.
a word that has been lost in the last 50 years.
Honor.
Class. Show some fucking
Oh
class,
yeah.
man. That's it.
Well,
Yeah.
right. Listen to that. Show us your class. Are you in the lowest class or are you in the highest class?
Mhm.
And
Right.
we circle right back around to definitions. What
Yeah.
kind of
And that, yeah, and that
talking
goes
about?
back to the
Yeah.
feudal system of the three estates, where the
Mhm.
first one was clergy, the second one was nobility, and the third was peasant.
Mhm.
Right.
And
So
and then
which
all of a
class
sudden
are you in?
Yeah.
and now all of a sudden we talk about, again, circling back, about trust. You need three classes, three Trinity, Bible, three. It's always your
Everywhere.
surname, middle name, first name,
Mhm.
three. And even if you want to get into this futuristic stuff, with Cliff High and everything else, about futuristic technologies. What did Tesla say? If you understand 3, 6, and 9, you'll get all of it.
It's the keys of the universe.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. So was he saying 3, 6, and 9 as being, the three parts of a trinity, the three parts of a trust system, and the three parts of this all combined into an equation? What was he doing? Well, he was leaving enough, behind. Another person that left enough behind, you were talking about the Constitution. And what did Ben Franklin say, apparently, to that one lady? It's a representative
Republic, ma'am, if you can keep it.
if you can keep it. And what did we do? We let it go. And I think we should all start figuring out how to get that fucker back. But that does show, flipping it on its head, that it was designed because he knew you were not going to be able to keep it.
Yep. They knew
And
it.
he was one of the original designers of it. And it wasn't just a suggestion. It was, we know
And
you're
he-
not going to be able to keep it.
He was an
designed it
agent
that
of the
way.
crown, and he worked for the Pope at the same
Yep.
time. So who's
Yep.
in control?
Yeah.
Right. This
And
has been a great conversation, Robert.
This has been
Holy shit.
wonderful. Yeah, thanks,
Loving
man.
it. Loving it.
I think so too, man. Let's do it again.
Yeah.
Oh,
Definitely.
absolutely. Anytime.
Definitely.
PrivateEstateTrust.org if you want any more information. It's called the House of Marcus, PrivateEstateTrust.org.
Perfect.
That's where all my stuff is. But you got to sign an NDA to get off the homepage because it's private.
Yeah.
So.